You're watching the PoliticIt podcast.
Good evening. Welcome to PoliticIt podcast. We've got Rob Bishop with us tonight. Thanks, Rob, for coming in. It's always a pleasure to be able to talk to you.
I appreciate your invitations, and I enjoy the discussions I have with you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been fun. So you know, there's several things that are going on. I'd like to start, if we can, with the big beautiful bill. Kind of get some of your impressions with it, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about, you know, why that was difficult to do, and some of the procedural things that were going on that I think have some people confused.
Well, first of all, I'm happy the big beautiful bill passed, not necessarily for what it was, but that it got passed at all. The process back in Congress of getting something to actually pass both the House and the Senate is so complicated and so driven by factions that it's almost impossible to do it. So the fact that they did something, that's a major statement, and it's a plus statement. The big beautiful bill wasn't everything I wanted. I don't think anyone wanted it, or everyone wanted every part of it. There was something they didn't like, but the problem was that was the best you could come up with. They went through the process known as reconciliation. So reconciliation was established in Congress a long time ago when they decided that if they made an appropriations and the revenue was not coming in there, Congress would have the ability of going back there and adjusting the figures of the appropriation so it would match. At the same time that you wouldn't have it subject to a filibuster in the Senate. But that meant that only specific things that dealt with specific appropriations could be handled in reconciliation. So what the House put in there, I thought, was a marvelous example of what they were trying to do with reconciliation. It went to the Senate, and unfortunately the Senate parliamentarian, they have two parliamentarians, the one parliamentarian cut a whole bunch of stuff out of it and ruled that things could not be considered in a reconciliation bill. So this is not like a regular bill. This was what they could do without having to invoke a potential filibuster in the Senate, which is the only way they could actually get something
So
done.
this is called this is what they refer to as the Byrd Rule. Is that right, or is that?
That's part of it. Yeah,
okay.
The Byrd Rule is some, and they give lots of names to it, but this was, and it's ironic for one person who probably put as much pork into the budget as possible. They're still going to name it after him. But there are certain things that have to relate to direct appropriations. And it can't be just, let's do something that's even better than what we have done before. It's not a regular bill. So with that, and I have some of my former staffers that are working on the House side that were working all night on these things and finally got it through. I'm proud that the Republicans and the House and the Senate specifically got something passed, and something that had several good things to it. The extension of the tax breaks, several are great. Several good things.
So you know that's something that I've heard online from people, and even the press. They sell this like there's this new tax break for the rich, and you basically mentioned this was just continuing the current tax code.
Yeah, they weren't going to stop the tax break that had been passed earlier. And the bottom line is there are some people that believe if you really want to get control of spending, you have to raise taxes so more money comes into the government. I'm sorry, I was there long enough to know that if you put more money into the government in taxes, they just spend more.
Yeah.
So letting people have their own money means that they actually can spend it on what they want, and it really does inflate the economy and improve the economy, build the economy, and grow the economy. So tax cuts are a good way of actually getting more done. And to just say we're gonna stop those so that we can get more money from everybody is always counterproductive. I'm sorry, it was counterproductive when Calvin Coolidge was president, when he made the first major tax cuts and tax breaks on people. The amount of money coming into the government actually increased. Eisenhower knew it, John Kennedy did the same thing, Ronald Reagan did the same thing, Trump did the same thing in his first term. We finally realized that raising taxes on people does not actually help balance the budget, it just hurts people.
Well, and a lot of these continuations of the tax cuts are stuff that was put in place in Reagan, right? And then redone by Trump.
Some of them by Reagan, and Bush did some too. George W. And then Trump was able to get some more through, and those would have been stopped had they not had a continuation. And that's a very good plus. And some of the programs that they tried to scale back, if you got a $17 trillion deficit, you can't do that by nickel and diming and cutting off the edges. You can't do it with a simple scalpel. There has to be some major changes, and I think this can facilitate some major changes coming in the future.
So a lot of the, Elon left. He was upset that certain cuts didn't happen. But as I read about it, some of the things he wanted done would actually have to take legislation to change the way the government works. Right?
There's some a very interesting individual. I didn't have some good relationships with him when I was back there in what he did with ATK and Thiokol, but beyond that, there are some things he had to realize that you can't do everything at once, but you can do some things and take credit for the some things that you actually do and then build on that. I wish he had stayed around, and perhaps he couldn't because of the limitations on how long you can be an unconfirmed member of the government.
Right.
But take these successes and then build upon them. But you're right, this was reconciliation. You don't have the entire broad range of what you could do if it was actually legislation. But if it was legislation, you got a couple of problems in both the House and the Senate that are procedural that tend to stop legislation from going through.
And what do we do? What do we do to change that? Is it even possible?
One of the things that I was criticized for is I love procedure, but I do. I thought procedure was the most important thing, and when I left, I made a couple of comments that my greatest accomplishments were changing the procedure of how we ran the committee. If you have bad procedure, I think you can end up with bad legislation. There are a couple of things in both the House and the Senate that I think are so bad procedure that they just increase the ability of having bad stuff getting passed or no stuff getting passed, in which case you never make reforms of any of this stuff. And if you're going to reduce $17 trillion in the deficit, you've got to have some reforms somewhere. They have to have some kind of action to take place. But I think I've mentioned to you before that one of the things that we do in the House, which bothers me to no end, is that you traditionally think that you're going to have debate and then vote on a bill. That was the way it was. That was the way it was planned to be. In the early sessions of Congress, that's what happened. They would go there, and people would come specifically to listen to the debate and would make up their minds after they heard debate. We have now, in the effort of being more efficient, we now do what's called roll votes, which simply means that you'll discuss everything by whomever happens to be on the floor, and then call all the members back in to vote on 15, 16, 20 items in a row. Those are roll votes. And then they can leave the floor and go back and do things again. Problem is, while you're debating those things, there's no one in there to listen to the debate. So one time in the Resource Committee, we were in the minority at that time, and I was the only Republican on the committee. I was standing in for the ranking Republican. I was outvoted on that committee 2-1 because there was the chairman and one other member from the Democrats on the committee. And we were debating the mining law, reforms to the mining law, which I think is a significant piece of legislation, especially in the National Resource Committee. Most of the amendments, in fact, all of the amendments that were proposed that morning. So nobody had ever seen them as we were going through them. I thought the three of us had a wonderful discussion. I really appreciate Chairman Rahal and Neil Abercrombie from Hawaii. And we had a great conversation. And when it came to the appointed time for the votes, then 48 other members of the committee came and took their seats and started to vote on things that they knew absolutely nothing up to the details. They weren't there for any of the discussions. They weren't there. They weren't published ahead of time. So basically, the other members came in, and if you were on the Democrat side, you voted with your Democrat leader. The Republican side with the Republican leader. It was a very frustrating concept. It means that Congress does not have to understand what they are upon which they are voting, and that's a negative, and that produces a bad product. Now, if it goes over to the Senate, and I wrote about this in the book too. I wrote a lot about it in the book. But in the Senate, they have the process known as filibuster. And I know a lot of our senators have claimed that filibusters are wonderful. You stop important stuff with the filibusters. My problem is, you can stop important stuff. I'm sorry, they say you can stop bad stuff.
Right.
You can stop bad stuff. You also stop good stuff. And if you happen to get a bad stuff in there, you're no way in hell you're ever going to get rid of it because you can find somebody that wants to filibuster. So in 1917, they decided to limit filibusters, and they passed the cloture concept. For the first 50 years, while they were doing that, while they had the ability of stopping a filibuster, they had 58 filibusters that went through anyway. So in the 1970s, the Senate, in the idea of becoming more efficient, decided, all right, let's stop this thing. We'll stop all the filibusters. If somebody's going to do a filibuster, we'll just move on to something that no one will filibuster. They thought that would be more efficient. In that period of time, there have been 50 years since they made that change. There have been over 1,700 threatened filibusters, which means anybody can threaten a filibuster, and all of a sudden now you can't.
That changes it.
The last bill I was working on in there, I went with my Senate counterpart, the chairman, and I would say we're going to come up with a bill that's going to be, it's going to be an omnibus bill, it's going to be a Christmas tree, whatever you want to call it. It was the only way I could get about 16 things done I needed for Utah. And we came in there and we'd say, okay, this is what the House wants to do, and the Senate chairman would say, Rob, that's right, it's the perfect thing to do, we should do it. The Senate will never accept that. And I would say, well, can't we try? And she said, no, we're not even going to be talking about that because I know it won't pass. Consequently, it was off the table. Some good things are off the table because the Senate knows somebody will threaten the filibuster. I'm sorry, I think you need to get rid of the filibuster, and then you may get bad stuff done, but you can much more quickly change it later on, because you can get done with it.
Well, and this budget reconciliation process, that kind of gets rid of the filibuster only for a very limited thing, right?
Yeah, and that's why they do reconciliations all the time and try and cram as much stuff in a reconciliation, simply because they don't have to piddle with the filibuster, where one crazy senator, and you got a whole lot from which to choose, one crazy senator can stop the entire concept from going forward.
Hey, we're going to take a break. We'll come right back.
Tired of media bias? Frustrated by political noise? PoliticIt.com cuts through the clutter, giving you real facts, clear analysis, and unbiased insight on the issues that matter most. Stay informed, stay empowered. Whether it's elections, policy changes, or breaking news, we've got you covered. No spin, no agendas, just truth you can trust. Visit PoliticIt.com today, because informed citizens shape the future. PoliticIt.com, where politics meets clarity.
Welcome back to PoliticIt. We're here with Rob Bishop. We were talking about, the filibuster, and we were talking about, this big, beautiful bill, but I'd like to talk to a couple of extra other things that have been in the press lately. One of the things we talked about just before the podcast is I was reading this tweet on Twitter about the government now investing in some natural resources, critical minerals area as a strategic play. I want to get your feedback on some of that. I mean, you're familiar with some of these companies. Well, not the companies involved with that, but this whole area of the critical minerals.
With the process, the United States has been very lax over the last 20 years about about mining. We've put so many roadblocks into increasing and expanding our mining opportunities and capacities that a lot of the minerals that we have traditionally relied on in the United States no longer are produced in the United States. And that was a major problem in the fact that we just thought that the land should be unspoiled and don't touch it, don't drill anything, not just for oil, don't drill for anything or dig for anything. The end result is we are now in a situation where some critical minerals, and that's why they're called critical minerals, are no longer produced in the United States. And we in Utah, I think, have an opportunity of dealing with that. I have been in conversations with a company headquartered in Canada, but they are also here in the state of Utah, that are reopening a mine in Juab County, right on the border, that does fluorspar and gallium. I hope that's right.
So explain what those do.
Those are critical minerals used in everything that we deal with, from my phones to nuclear weapons. If you want to have uranium enhanced for nuclear energy, you need fluorspar. this place in Utah is the only mine in the United States that can produce fluorspar. And they have the gallium that's but the only other place we can get gallium is from communist China. And they are trying to muscle in by stopping any trade of gallium into the United States. So all of a sudden, we have in the state of Utah, if we're willing to invest in mines, that the ability of actually producing things that are critical. If you want to develop and enrich uranium for nuclear power in some case, to have clean energy, you know, have fluorspar. It's an essential element to it. State of Utah, I think, is much better than the federal government ever was. State of Utah does have some ability. In the last session, you did invest some money in a loan payback program, which means you'll give the money up front, and then eventually with the profits, they'll pay the state back so the state can invest more. The biggest problem I see in any of these mines coming forward is you need upfront money to begin it. That's where the expense takes place.
They need to prove that they can actually deliver something.
Yeah,
right?
Once you actually start developing it, you've got everybody and their third cousin that wants to invest in it with money. But to get that upfront start coming through, and this mine in Juab County, for example, was an abandoned mine that they're bringing up to fruition again. And there's some other things in the state of Utah, especially over in the basin, where we have the ability of creating all sorts of stuff that can be used for the furtherance of everything we need from military construction. I think that's what you were talking about. What they were saying is the military is going to invest in this stuff because the military needs it, but we need it for our daily lives, just to run your cell phone. These are the things that you need to do.
Right. And magnets, you know, are essential now for a lot of what we're doing with electric cars and everything, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, when we started the session this year, and that's probably where this bill came from that you were referring to, President Adams actually talked about, you know, this kind of key moment we're in the state of Utah where, focusing on energy development, focusing on critical minerals, right? Focusing on AI and data centers and stuff that are going to help power that revolution. And, you know, as I listened to this, I thought, God, we're really in a key position. We've got a lot of this raw material in the state of Utah that we can develop.
We have to be in the mindset of being able to develop mining as an important part of the economy of the state of Utah. I mean, there's some people that think that, you know, tourism is the only thing, it's a clean industry, build your economy on tourism. Well, Hawaii showed what happens when you have a COVID problem and the tourism just tanks.
Right.
We need to have a widespread variety of resources and kinds of economic activities in Utah. So tourism is part of it, but also the mining activity. We need to encourage that. We need, and there is so much that is in the state of Utah, and where Utah could be a leader in developing nuclear energy, that Utah would be foolish not to do the best we can to try and develop all those resources that we have. That needs to be an essential part, and not just for the state as a whole, but especially for those areas which are more rural, where these mines and this development can take place.
Well, this is an area that you spent much of your time in Congress on, right? And on the Natural Resource Committee. And
I wish I could go back and start over again and be twice as vindictive and twice as diligent and twice as pushy to try and make sure that we didn't stop doing those kinds of critical minerals, and we tried to develop them more than we were. I wish I can go back and do more than we did. I don't feel bad about what we did, because that was what I was trying to do. I wish I was able to push it more.
Well, so what do you think we can do as a state legislature to help with this push?
I think the state legislature is doing several things. You're recognizing what the problem is, providing the loan guarantees, and providing some of those monies that can be upfront money to develop these industries, on obviously getting paid back, so it can be a revolving fund. So when the state gets paid back from one, you can develop it in something else. I think the state's doing that, and the state has to have its mind clear that you're realizing that the areas, especially in rural Utah, and unfortunately a lot of them are federally owned areas, that they need to be developed. It can't just be, you can't just lock it up and throw away the key. That development is essential, is very important. and it has all sorts of potential outgrowth too. Part of it is something else that the state legislature has to deal with. If you really are going to develop these areas, especially in the rural places, you've got to do a lot of infrastructure also. Like Roosevelt is desperately in need of housing. You can't get the amount of people to go out there to build the houses because they're building it all on the Wasatch Front. We need more housing development, but that means we need more people who can build houses in these outlying areas. And if you can do that, then you can spur the growth out in those particular areas as well.
Very good. So any closing remarks? I mean, we're about out of time.
No, I appreciate coming here and talking to you and being able to throw out the things that used to mean something when I was back in Washington and could do something about it.
Yeah.
But I think Utah has all sorts of potential if we just make sure that we develop it and we don't close our eyes to it, and we recognize that Utah needs to take a leading role in some of these things. You have a Federalism Commission which talks about a lot of things.
Yeah.
It's good. The
Yeah.
state of Utah needs to be a partner and needs to take the lead on a lot of these particular issues, which could mean so much for the state of Utah in the future and the citizens here.
Before you leave, what are you doing now with your time? I mean, you're teaching a class. Are you still doing that?
I am still teaching one class at Utah State. Fortunately, there is a set of money they have aside for having people that are from the community to teach classes there. I'm still doing that.
What class is that?
It's basically a poli-sci class, particularly on what we were doing in Congress and what they were doing.
So what about your book? Let's put in a plug for your book. I think people need to.
When I went back to Washington, I realized that a lot of the stuff I was teaching, and I was doing AP classes in high school, and the textbooks were outdated. Not maliciously, but they were just wrong. It wasn't what I was doing. And I felt compelled, as I would fly back and forth every week, to write down the stories that I had experienced that I wish I had had when I was actually teaching school. So the book is called Things I Learned in Congress, Which They Didn't Teach in School. It's an effort to try and go through what it was like to actually work in Congress, and also there's a section there about what it was like to live back in Washington and what I had to go through, as well as some of the philosophy, I think, of what the founding of this country actually means. So it's still out there. I feel comfortable because this is something I wish teachers had, because I think it was the kinds of things I wish I had known when I was actually still a school teacher.
And you talk about some of this in your class, don't you?
I do. More and more. This is the point that I'm going to make my kids at Utah State have the book, but I'm not making them buy it. That just seems immoral for me. So I'm going to give it, and hopefully I can say, if I'm not going to be able to be there, read it. They can have an extra source.
Right. Very good. Thank you, Rob Bishop. Thanks
you.
for coming in. We'll
My
see you
pleasure.
guys next week.